Thanks for downloading a 3CR podcast. 3CR is an independent community radio station based in Melbourne, Australia. We need your financial support to keep going. Go to www.3cr.org.au for more information and to donate online. Now stay tuned for your 3CR podcast.
Sabah al-Khair. Good morning, dear listeners. You're listening to Radio 3CR on 855 AM and Palestine Remembered with Yusuf Al-Rimawi, Nasser Mashni and Robert Martin. Thank you for tuning in to another edition of Australia's only radio program that is totally dedicated to the Palestinian cause in English language. We'd like to welcome our listeners on the AM dial and those who'll join us on 3cr.org.au/podcasts. Today's episode will be dedicated to the infamous Balfour Declaration. Stay with us. Good morning, Nasser.
Morning, Yusuf.
Nasser, this episode is going to be purely dedicated to Balfour Declaration.
Mm-hmm. And we had the anniversary only a couple of days ago.
Mm-hmm. And I think talking about a turning point like this piece of paper that, like you said before we start recording, was the beginning of the death of Palestine. Mm-hmm. Might open horizons of different aspects, so we'll do our best.
Well, we should just to make clear that comment up, Yusuf. It was the Israelis, as we've seen, Bill Shorten and Malcolm Turnbull in Israel celebrating the charge of the Light Horse Brigade, the last cavalry charge of history. And we'll get onto that later in the show. But the reality is the Zionists and the Israelis are claiming the charge a couple of days before the Balfour Declaration as the birth of Israel, and they've marched with horses and Israeli flags as if, some 31 years before the establishment of the State of Israel, the Israelis were fighting with the Australians, as opposed to the fact that the Palestinians stood alongside our Aussie diggers to liberate Palestine from the Ottomans.
I'm sure if one of the Aussie diggers was alive and witnessed something like this, he won't feel that.
No, it's an affront. It's an affront to their memory and to their sacrifice.
So,
but coming back to Balfour,
coming back to Balfour. First of all, what is Balfour Declaration? What's the wording of it?
There are 84 terrible words, Yusuf, and this is the most historic portrayal of an indigenous people's rights as humans and their right to self-determination. And in, when we read the words, and our listeners would know, there's never been anything like it, an empire promising the land that it has yet to conquer. So at this point, Britain doesn't own the land or hasn't conquered it, and is promising it to a people that doesn't live there without asking the people that already do live there. This is the absurdity of it. Huh?
People who don't deserve that land.
So the words are, and this was... on the 2nd of November 1917, and it was sent from the United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour, and he sent it to Lord Walter Rothschild, who was the leader of the British Jewish community, and he asked for that transmission to the Zionist Federation of Great Britain and Ireland. And the letter says, His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. I should be grateful if you would bring this declaration to the knowledge of the Zionist Federation. I mean, what you said before, Yusuf, this was the beginning of the death of the national aspirations or the state of Palestine. But what it was, in fact, was the birth of Palestinian identity and nationhood striving. I mean, we wouldn't be here how we identify as proud Palestinians, defiant in the face of Western imperialism and colonialism.
I want to shed some light on the word declaration, because in Arabic history books and media, we don't use the Arabic word for declaration. We use the Arabic word for promise. We call it Wa'ad Balfour, the promise of Balfour. And I think to stop at the declaration from a legal point of view, one of the Arab historians actually highlighted that that declaration was directed more to the allies of UK and France more than the Jews, meaning that, as you would know, the year before Balfour Declaration, the world witnessed another secret agreement, which is the Sykes-Picot Agreement in April 1916. And it remained secret until the Russian Revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, in September 17, which is 6 weeks before the declaration. So the allies of UK and France were surprised that, these two had cut the pieces without taking into consideration that they had Italians, they had the Americans, and also the other promises that they gave to the Hashemites, the Arabs. And the declaration was to a list of declarations. One of them was Balfour, the other one was the future of Cyprus, and the other one was what's going to happen to the Christians of Lebanon. So the British government issued several declarations pretty much directed to its allies. And what made that historian believe that this is more to the allies of Britain was that it was to a British citizen, to Lord Rothschild, as opposed to the head of the Zionist organization back then, Weizmann. So it was a British government declaration to a British citizen, and that didn't have the word state, but home for the Jews. Anyway, we can talk more about that in future episodes, but let me bring you back, Nasser, to...
We should go back to where you were on Sykes-Picot, and just to elaborate on that, Yusuf. The Bolshevik Revolution was this concept of, the death of colonialism. And so when they exposed Sykes-Picot, which was a year before the Balfour Declaration,
a year and a half
before the Balfour Declaration, this was exposed to the people. And what the British and French had decided to do was carve up the Arab world amongst protectorates to themselves. But we need to go back a year before that, and to the conversation that was being had between Sharif Hussein of Mecca, the Emir of Mecca, and the McMahon, the letters. And the reality is that the British had promised us independence. The independence was promised to the Arabs if they fought with the Brits as allies
against the Turks,
against the Ottoman Empire, against the Germans. So, and this is evidence. If you go to any World War I memorial, go to the shrine or any World War I memorial in Australia, and you'll see Palestine on the memorials, as you will see Gallipoli, El Alamein, and all the other famous battles that were fought during World War I. So that famous McMahon Hussein papers, those letters, were the promise that saw our Palestinians, Arabs, fight alongside Australian diggers to liberate Beersheba, and ultimately lead through Allenby through to Jerusalem and on through to Damascus.
But also my problem with the Australian involvement in the commemoration of Beersheba battle, it gives the impression that the battlefield was Palestine and the armies were in Palestine. In fact, the battlefield was Europe, and Palestine was part of the agreement, and all they did was they cut the logistic supply to the Turkish Empire, and then the Turks lost the war. But are we talking about thousands of people who died in the war to liberate, let's say, Beersheba from the Turks? No, we're talking about an army of 800 people, and battles, and over 2 years, by the way, the British conquered or occupied Palestine from Turkey. We're talking about 2 years, which means that they didn't feel that the rush to send troops to Palestine. So the battlefield was in Europe.
Well, remained in Europe,
and the echoes of war were in our countries.
But we should, just to paraphrase, the Britons promised us. They then did a deal with the French, and then they went and promised us to promise Palestine to the Jews and the Zionists. And it should be also noted that one of the strategic intents of the Balfour Declaration because, in 1905, Balfour was Prime Minister of Israel, Prime Minister of England, excuse me. Mm-hmm. And the Jews of England knew him as an anti-Semite. I mean, this guy was wrote and sponsored what was called the Aliens Bill in the House of Commons. Now, when the pogroms and the massacres that were happening throughout Russia against the Jews, he sponsored an anti-immigration bill called the Aliens Bill to stop Jews from seeking refuge in England. Yeah, this is Balfour.
Fleeing persecution in Russia.
Persecution. And gets to the point, here we are in 1917, we need to get America to join forces with the Allies to help defeat the Germans. And so the theory was that if we can placate the Jews here, they can use their influence in the United States and bring the United States in on the side of on the side of the Allies. So
that's a very important point, Nasser, and I think it brings us to the reason why Balfour witnessed a turning point from being anti-Semite to sponsoring what could be the most important document Israel used to legitimize its illegal existence. I think the role of Weizmann, personal role of Weizmann on convincing Balfour that the Zionism is one thing and Judaism is another thing. And this also brings us to the core point that our conflict is not with, let's say, the Jews being the followers of a faith, as much as it is against an ideology, an evil ideology like Zionism that sees itself superior to the landowners of Palestine.
Well, the Palestine that Balfour wanted to turn into a Jewish national home had a Palestinian population of 600-odd thousand. On top of that, there were 60,000 Jews. 50% of those 60,000 Jews were anti-Zionist. So here we are, 30,000 people out of a total population of 700,000. So we're talking less than 5% were in fact Zionist. And Balfour was promising the whole of that land to people that weren't even there.
Even the roots of Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv started during the Ottoman era. It didn't start as a result of Balfour.
No.
The Jews had access to Palestine, also although limited access, but they were given freedoms to set up their kibbutz and to start their communities and live and express their freedom of worship and opinion within the mainstream pluralistic society that we call Palestine and will always be called Palestine. So to give the impression that Tel Aviv or any Jewish community was a result of the British or let's say the Balfour Declaration is wrong.
Yep, no question. And also, one of the things we've talked about in our Nakba shows before, we should not ever forget that by the time the British were ready to leave Palestine and hand the mandate over to the United Nations, the Jews, the Zionists, still only owned less than 6% of Palestine.
That's in November 47.
They stole the rest.
Yeah. So even to control 6% of Palestine after 25 years of British mandate, after all the facilities and all the support and all the help that they received and all the complicity, actually, there's no other word to describe the British role. It was a complicit role
not just complicit. I mean, we should actually, in fact, go back and say the Palestinians resisted.
Of course.
As soon as Balfour came out, the Palestinians didn't want to take it down, lying down. And they endeavored to organize. The first Palestinian National Congress was tried to be held in January of 19, just 13 months after the British occupation. And the Congress was a desire for Palestinians to express their self-determination, and they wanted to make it clear at the outset. Now, a delegation was nominated to represent the Palestinian people, and this was sent to the Paris Peace Conference. But the British prevented them from leaving Palestine. The British banned the Second Congress. The Third Congress happened in December of 1920 and agreed to send a deputation to Cairo, and that's where they met with the colonial secretary of the time, Sir Winston Churchill. He refused to meet them. When he did meet them months later in Jerusalem, Churchill played a critical role in trying to sell the declaration to the Palestinians. Tried to sell the Palestinians the Balfour Declaration on the basis that what was being proposed was a national home. Not the national home, a national home.
Not a state.
Not a state, yeah. The Palestinians obviously were not fooled and were quick to voice, their opposition. And from there, that was the start of real Palestinian resistance. So the general strikes, the protests, the British wouldn't allow us to establish political structures. They started to jail our men and women, but we still mobilized against them. They decided to crush any opportunity they could of us building institution. That being the case, that's from the period and we'll just quickly touch on the on 36 to 39 years, if I know your expertise in that space. But from Balfour to 48, any opportunity at state building that we endeavoured to do was crushed. But during those 3 decades, they did everything they could to facilitate Zionist state building.
Yep.
Whether it was in creating a proto-army, the Haganah, whether it was in the Land and Settlement Division, the Jewish National Fund, whether it was in the Jewish Agency, the entire process
the union, the library, the universities.
The government in waiting was birthed under the Brits, all while they were destroying every fabric of our leadership and government and institution building.
Let alone crushing any form of resistance.
Well, 36 to 39, as we know, and this is, arguably one of the greatest anti-imperialist struggles of modern time, when the Palestinians, rose up against the occupation.
We call it the Thawra al-Kubra, the Grand Revolution.
Yep.
For 6 months, the civil society in Palestine and the elitists, whether we are talking about religious leadership or political leadership, paralyzed Palestine in form of trade and actually punished the British mandate and boycotted dealing and working with them. For 6 months there were strikes and demonstrations, and in fact our first national anthem was born in 36, the Mawtani anthem. Ibrahim Touqan wrote it, and it became the slogan of the 6 months Grand Revolution, but unfortunately it was aborted later with the help of regional and even Arab leaders' complicity.
Well,
before I also want to bring the role of bringing America to World War I, and the role that the Zionist agency played in bringing America to fight World War I alongside with the UK, France, and the price for that was Palestine. In fact, when America joined the war, it was 2 years after the beginning of World War I. And having kept their promise, having brought America to the world, they returned to the British cabinet and asked for something, because they didn't know that the war would take maybe 10 more years or something like that. So they wanted a receipt that you owe me.
Yep.
And that receipt took the form of the declaration, and that's another driving force why behind the Balfour Declaration.
Yeah. So here we are, the end of the 36 to 39, the Great Revolt. Many of the Israeli, the housing demolitions, administrative detentions, these were, learned off the Brits. And this is the way the Brits dealt with the Palestinians during that time. And they're still being instituted today, 70 years later, just to the barbarity of the Israeli mentality. But the challenge, the fact that we weren't able to defend Palestine in 1948 is as a direct consequence, of the institution building and facilitation that the British enabled the Zionists to prepare for 48, decades out, but also the complete and utter destruction of our leadership and the cohesion of our society, that we were not able to defend Palestine in 1948.
Because as naive and silly the Israeli suggestion that, we were given a UN vote in 47, and in May 48 we established a state, as if, in 6 months you could build everything you need to start a state and declare it, and then you have recognition within minutes, with all the poor communication in 48,
without the internet or Facebook,
You have the Soviet Union recognizing Israel even before America within minutes. In 48. So to fool us that, it took us, we are the miracle that, we turned desert into these gardens, dismisses the facts that it took 3 decades of systematic pouring of resources towards one
money,
side.
Human resources.
You just name it. Any form of resources, let alone lobbying, let alone arms, into creating institutions to the future state of Israel.
Well, the challenge we've got is that, rather than looking upon it with shame, the Balfour Declaration, in Britain today, they are celebrating the Balfour Declaration. Benjamin Netanyahu is on his way to meet with Theresa May, and they'll be having, an imperial dinner, wherever they might have that in London. One of the great things is the huge uproar that the Palestinian Solidarity Movement has been able to gather in London. Jeremy Corbyn of the Labour Party has refused an invitation to attend and said he would not be celebrating the Balfour Declaration.
Rightly so.
And rightly so, because, we coming back to the Balfour Declaration and these salient words that are still 100 years later not honoured, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. I mean, here we are, Yusuf, you and I are Palestinian. We've been prejudiced. We've lost our civil and religious rights to our homeland, the birthplace of our fathers. And 100 years later, and they want us to celebrate.
So today's reality is a breach even to the standards set by the declaration itself, let alone human rights or ethics or international law.
If Britain was to hold itself to be a moral entity, if it was to hold itself, aside from the crimes in Palestine, with the Britain's colonial crimes across the world, couldn't be counted, whether it be to our indigenous people in Australia here today, or the peoples of India or Bangladesh or all over the world, Singapore, Malay, etc. The least they could do is acknowledge the historic, legal, and their and moral responsibility for the damage caused, the millions of deaths, the millions of refugees. They could issue an official apology. They could immediately recognise the state of Palestine. That wouldn't be too hard for them to do. As a minimum, they could institute reparations. The whole compensation. The world has paid thousands of times over for what Germany has for what they did in France and Poland to the Jews. Well, we are should be afforded the same rights, and then most of all, doing its duty as a permanent member of the United Nations in ensuring that Israel upholds international law. If nothing else, just make these bastards stop killing kids. Stop stealing land.
How
stop
difficult
denying,
is that?
It should not be hard.
However, they're doing everything opposite, and Theresa May saying that they will celebrate Balfour with pride.
It's disgusting.
And I want to read something from Facebook, basically, one of my friends' comments. I think I like this post. England had as much right to promise Palestine to the Jews as Jamaica would have to promise Japan to Ireland for any reason whatsoever in terms of rights.
We laugh, Yusuf, but that's how absurd it is. The increasingly, and this is the thing that unites us. There isn't a Palestinian. It's probably about the fifth word we learn. Mama, Baba, Balfour. Yeah, that with all that, with 100 years of brutality and ethnic cleansing. And everything that we have suffered. The one thing that, and we started the show talking about it, Yusuf, was the concept of statehood of Palestine died then, but it was also the birth of Palestinian nationalism. We take it and we look back and say, I wouldn't want to be anything else other than a Palestinian. I've travelled, a fair chunk of the world and met millions of different, many different people from many different countries. But the thing that, so inspires me about Palestine, I'm sure we'll hear more about it from Rob when he gets back in a couple of weeks, is that have a look at Zionism and have a look at the state of Israel and everything it has. Whether it's wealth, whether it's prominence, they can get our Prime Minister and our leader of the opposition over to celebrate a battle with, a mock charge with Israeli flags that didn't exist. 31 years before the State of Israel existed. This entire Disneyland experience that is the State of Israel in 1917. They can command such attention. He can then fly to to Britain, the halls of Britain, and Theresa May said, "What a fantastic thing! We're joined by our Prime Minister." With all of that, nuclear weapons, submarines, money. Sheldon Anderson, billionaire casino magnate in America, buying a newspaper just to promote Benjamin Netanyahu. Yeah, spent $100 million on Mitt Romney against Obama in his second thing to try and get Obama out, because Barack Hussein Obama, he couldn't possibly be just an American.
Even though that Barack Obama was as Zionist as everyone else.
$38 billion in 10 years. Nobody had ever given him that much
before.
money. He spent $100 million on a losing bet to get Obama out in his second term. With all that power, arsenal, guns, tanks, all that. And the Palestinians haven't given up.
No.
They're scared shitless. They're like, what will it take to defeat these people? They don't realize we are indefeatable. The concept, and Yusuf, we had dinner on Monday night and a friend of ours joined us, and she spoke about her own first visit back to Palestine. And, she's a gorgeous young lady, but she looks like us. She's an other. Here she's an other. And she spoke about her personal journey and going to Palestine and just being one of us, being home. And she was trying to explain...
even the small details, something like the za'atar, the smell of za'atar in the morning.
Just seeing her curly hair, which she had always been somewhat shy about, or maybe not really
ashamed. Stood out.
It stood out. Her cousins had the same curly hair.
Yeah.
And it was that reconnection to earth, and in the I think she described it, we're talking about like the movie in Avatar, where having been torn from the land, having your roots reattach organically, and this is what Zionism doesn't understand, is that our roots are in that soil. We cannot be defeated.
Here
they cannot understand why we haven't given up, because they would have given up. But that's because their roots aren't in their land, in that land.
And that's because the color of the land doesn't look like the color of their skin. And they don't know that in 2 weeks our young kids are going to sing the national anthem, and our community...
we should say 15th of November, 5 p.m. at Federation Square, Palestine National Day.
And the Palestinian community will celebrate its National Day in a form of reminding Israel and its friends and the world that we have not forgotten, and we will never forget, and we will keep this tribe, even if we have, not as strong friends as Israel does. We value every form of support. We look at it as this is our driving force to continue, and in addition to our fathers' legacies and memories. So we will not forget. And yes, this year marks the 100-year anniversary of Balfour Declaration. But the day will come that we will look at this document and we will say that we have liberated Palestine despite this century of colonization and despite all this statelessness. And inshallah, that day will not be very far away from today.
Well, we should remind our listeners, Yusuf, these are the two great lies. Number one, a land without people for people without a land, lie, debunked. Number two, the old will die and the young will forget. Well, we're the embodiment of the fact that hasn't happened. Now, it's Saturday morning. There's still a couple of days left, ladies and gentlemen. The Palestine Film Festival opened on Thursday night, so go on the internet, palestinefilmfestival.com.au, and check out some movies.
Great movies and screening in Nova Cinema in Carlton.
Carlton, that's right. 15th of November, 5 p.m, Federation Square, Palestine National Day. We'll be raising the flag again. The 19th, the Sunday, is the Run for Palestine, runforpalestine.com.au. And on the 30th, we've got Gideon Levy, the Haaretz Israeli journalist at the State Library. So you can find the details for all of those events at apan.org.au.
Thanks, Nasser. And I think with this, we have come to the end of this week's episode that we purely dedicated to the infamous Balfour Declaration. And we will see you next Saturday with more news, reflections, stories from Palestine. Until then, have a great time. This is Nasser and Yusuf, and salam.